A frozen December night, 1995. The Essex air hung thick with mist, the kind that swallowed sound. Headlights cut through the fog, tracing a lonely path down a narrow country lane near Retendon. At the end of that lane, a Range Rover sat motionless, its engine still running, exhaust whispering into the cold. When the officers arrived, they saw the glint of shattered glass and blood pooling on the seats. 3 men inside, each slumped lifeless. No signs of a struggle, no escape, just clean, precise gunshots to the head. It was the kind of scene that didn't look real, more like a warning than a crime. By morning, news would break. The men were no ordinary victims. They were the Essex boys, Tony Tucker, Pat Tate and Craig Rolfe, the self-proclaimed kings of the county's booming drug trade. Their empire had been built on fear, arrogance and violence. But that night, someone with better timing and colder nerves had decided their rule was over. The execution was surgical, swift, silent, professional. There were no witnesses, no gun found, no fingerprints left behind. Just 3 bodies, a Range Rover and a message. Power in Britain's underworld comes with an expiry date. But this was only one chapter in a much longer story. A story written not in ink, but in blood. Long before the Essex boys, another name had already shown Britain what true gangland execution looked like. London, the 1960s, a city of style and smoke, swinging lights, jazz bars and faces that smiled through crime. At the centre of it all, 2 brothers whose charm was as dangerous as their rage, Ronnie and Reggie Kray. They were adored by some and feared by all. Club owners, actors, even politicians dined with them. They dressed like gentlemen, spoke like businessmen, but ruled like warlords. Their East End empire, the Firm, was built on intimidation, and their word was law. Ronnie was unpredictable, the fire. Reggie, composed and the face of reason. Together, they balanced brutality with glamour, convincing London they were just misunderstood local heroes. But beneath the tailored suits and slicked-back hair, both men were capable of violence that made even seasoned criminals go pale. One night, in March 1966, that mask slipped. Inside the Blind Beggar pub in Whitechapel, Ronnie Kray spotted a rival, George Cornell, sitting at the bar. There was a flicker of recognition, a smirk, and then a single gunshot. Cornell dropped instantly. In front of a dozen witnesses, Ronnie calmly pocketed his weapon and lit a cigarette. "He won't be talking anymore," he said. For a time, even that didn't shake their control. The Krays continued to move untouchable through the city, until betrayal came from within. Jack the Hat McVitie, once a loyal associate, began to run his own scams. Reggie invited him to a meeting, a chance to settle differences. The night ended with McVitie stabbed repeatedly in a Hackney flat. Reggie's rage unstoppable. That murder ended the Firm's reign. When the police finally broke through the wall of silence, witnesses turned, and the twins were arrested. In 1969, they stood before the Old Bailey, calm, composed, and utterly unrepentant. The trial marked the end of an era. The Krays were sent away for life, but the myth they built outlived them. For years afterward, their names still echoed through London's alleys and pubs, a ghostly reminder that in Britain's underworld, fame and fear are often the same thing. And as their empire faded, others rose, new cities, new names, and with them, new ways to kill. It's 30 years later. December 1995. A cold country lane. The echoes of the Krays' London have long been replaced by a new generation of criminals. Faster, greedier, more ruthless. The drug trade had evolved, and so had the violence. The 3 men inside that Range Rover, Tucker, Tate, Rolfe, were known across Essex for their brutality. They lived like kings and treated loyalty like currency, but power attracts envy, and envy sharpens knives. That night, they drove to Retendon believing they were heading to a deal, a shipment, a payday, something worth the risk. Instead, they drove straight into an ambush. Whoever planned it knew every move they would make. No shouting, no warning, no mistakes. Within seconds, the job was done. When detectives pieced together the timeline, the brutality stunned even them. Whoever had pulled the trigger didn't just want them dead. They wanted them erased. 3 bullets each, execution style. The case exploded across the news. Rumours spread faster than facts. Some said it was a rival gang, others claimed an inside betrayal. In 1998, 2 men, Jack Holmes and Michael Steele, were convicted, but the whispers never stopped. Too many unanswered questions, too many people with something to gain. The killings became legend. Books, films, endless theories. But behind the headlines, one truth stood tall. In the criminal world, your friend today can be your executioner tomorrow, and that truth didn't fade with time. In fact, it only got more sophisticated. Fast forward 20 years. The setting is no longer a pub or a lonely farm lane. but a suburban street in Salford, a city that built its wealth on industry and buried its secrets in silence. Paul Massey was known here as Mr. Big. He'd grown from a street enforcer into a feared power broker. To some, he was a community man. To others, a crime boss. But either way, his name carried weight, and that kind of weight attracts enemies. On July 26, 2015, Massey stepped outside his home. The night was quiet, still. Then came the sound, a burst of gunfire that shattered the calm. Neighbours ducked behind curtains as bullets ripped through the dark. When the smoke cleared, Massey lay dead on his driveway. 18 wounds, no warning, no words. It was an execution, the kind reserved for people who know too much or owe too many. 3 years later, another man fell. Ben Kinsella, an associate of Massey's and a known enforcer, was walking with his partner when a cyclist pulled alongside. 2 shots to the back, 1 to the head. Quick, precise, rehearsed. The shooter rode away like nothing had happened. Detectives had seen enough to know this wasn't random. It was a chain reaction. 2 killings, same style, same silence. But who had the skill, the nerve, and the reason? The answer came not from a confession, but from technology. A GPS fitness watch and something so ordinary, so harmless, turned out to be the killer's undoing. Its data placed one man at both murder scenes. His name, Mark Fellows. His nickname, the Iceman. Fellows had planned every move, every escape route. He used encrypted phones, hidden routes, and surveillance patterns. But in the end, it was his own digital trail that betrayed him. In January 2019, he was convicted and given a whole life sentence. The police called it one of the most meticulous assassinations in British criminal history. To the underworld, it was a chilling reminder. Even the perfect crime leaves a footprint. As the judge read the verdict, Fellows stared straight ahead, expressionless. No emotion, no regret, just ice. And once again, Britain was forced to face the same question. How far will men go to protect power, even when the walls are closing in? In Gangland, revenge always looks the same at first, loud, public, merciless. But sometimes it hides in plain sight, wearing a school uniform, walking home beneath streetlights. It was June 29th, 2008, and the air in Islington carried the pulse of weekend laughter. 16-year-old Ben Kinsella had just finished his GCSEs. He was out celebrating, thinking about art school summer life. Then came a shout, an argument that wasn't his, and a street that turned deadly in seconds. The fight had nothing to do with Ben. He ran when the noise grew, but the killers followed. 3 men driven by pride and drink and that warped sense of reputation that turns petty grudges into funerals. When they caught him, they stabbed him 11 times. No mercy, no reason, just rage mistaken for honour. By dawn, London woke to headlines it could barely comprehend. A child had been murdered over nothing. The killers, Jade Braithwaite, Michael Allain and Juris Kika, were soon arrested. But conviction didn't bring calm. It only deepened the country's shock. Ben's sister, Brooke, refused to let his name become another statistic. She built a trust in his memory, a campaign that toured schools, prisons and communities, teaching teenagers what gang loyalty really costs. Because sometimes the price of revenge isn't paid by those who start it, but by the innocent who stand too close when the knife falls. Ben Kinsella's death was more than a tragedy. It was a mirror held up to Britain's youth, showing how violence had drifted from organised gangs into everyday life. How the logic of payback had poisoned a generation that barely knew what it was fighting for. 14 years earlier, 400 miles north, another story had shown how ordinary life can turn into warfare. The streets of Glasgow had always been rough, but in the 1980s a strange new battleground emerged. Ice cream vans. To most, they were symbols of childhood. Jingling music, cones, soft serve, smiles. To the men who ran them, they were the perfect cover. Behind the freezers were stolen goods, drugs and money changing hands. Control of the routes meant control of profit, and profit bred greed. Andrew Fatboy Doyle drove one of those vans. He refused to play along, refused to let gang leaders dictate where he could sell. The threat started small, broken windows, slashed tyres, but Doyle stood firm. Then came the fire. April 16th, 1984. In the early hours, petrol was poured through the letterbox of the Doyle family home in Ruchesi. Flames swallowed the building before anyone could reach the door. When firefighters finally broke inside, 6 bodies were found. Andrew, his brothers, his sister-in-law, her 2 children and their father. An entire family erased over an ice cream route. Scotland had never seen anything like it. The public demanded answers. The police promised justice. Convictions followed, but controversy still clings to the case. Some say the wrong men were punished. Others say the truth burned away with the house. What no one denies is the horror, a petty turf war-turned massacre, proof that when greed and vengeance collide, innocence is the first to burn. The ice cream wars left a scar that never fully healed. For Glasgow, it was a warning that crime doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it plays a tune children recognise and waits for the next rival to blink. Every story so far has ended the same way, with bodies, trials, headlines. But to understand why these killings keep happening, you have to climb higher beyond the gunmen and foot soldiers to the men who run the trade that funds them all. In Liverpool, that man had a name whispered with equal parts awe and fear. Curtis "Cocky" Warren. He started small, street deals, stolen cars, but ambition made him unstoppable. By the 1990s, he was importing drugs by the ton, moving shipments across oceans, turning ports into private gateways. The newspapers called him Britain's richest criminal. He called himself a businessman. Warren's empire stretched from South America to Europe. He spoke several languages, made deals with cartels, and bragged he could buy his own island. He never carried a gun. He didn't need to. His power was money, and money made people pull the trigger for him. But even empires built on fortune eventually collapse under their own weight. In 2009, Warren was sentenced to 13 years for cannabis importation. Released and watched, he still couldn't stay away from the game. By 2024, he was back in custody for breaching serious crime orders, proof that some men can't live outside the shadows they built. Warren's story explains everything that came before. The Krays used fists and fear. The Essex boys used drugs and greed. The Salford hits used technology and precision. But they all drew from the same well, the endless thirst for control that makes men believe they can outsmart fate. At the top, Curtis Warren was the mirror every criminal avoided looking into, the man who won everything and still couldn't walk free. Because in the end, the currency of crime isn't cash, it's time, and time always runs out. From London's smoky pubs to Essex's frozen fields, from Salford's digital assassins to Glasgow's burning homes, Britain's underworld has changed faces but never its heart. Power, pride, payback, the trinity that keeps the cycle turning. Every decade writes its own version of the same story. A mother crying in court, a family home turned crime scene, a detective staring at another body wondering what loyalty is worth. The methods evolve, knives, bullets, fire, data, but the outcome doesn't. Because every empire, no matter how secret, leaves traces, patterns, messages, names etched into headlines for a week and into grief forever. And in the quiet aftermath, when sirens fade and reporters pack up, the question always remains: what drives a human being to cross the line from fear to dominance, from survival to slaughter? Maybe it's pride, maybe it's power, maybe it's the illusion that killing your rival means you've won. But history keeps proving the opposite. For every Ronnie Kray, there's a courtroom waiting. For every Essex boy, a cold lane in the dark. For every Iceman, a digital footprint leading straight to a cell. Even the smartest criminals forget the oldest truth. Patterns never lie, and the walls always close in. So when we talk about Britain's most savage executions, we're not just recounting crimes. We're tracing a loop, a cycle of violence disguised as honour, profit, or revenge. A loop that ends the same way every time, with silence, cuffs, and another name crossed off the list. If this story opened your eyes, take a moment before you scroll away. Think about the lives behind the headlines, the victims, the families, the communities that never heal. Then do one small thing: share the lesson, not the legend. And if you want to keep uncovering the truth behind Britain's darkest crimes, stay with us. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us next time as we step deeper into the shadows, where every secret eventually meets the light.